Hi, everyone. I'm John Niehaus, Director of Program Development for the National Association of Flight Instructors, and I'd like to welcome you to this edition of NAFI Briefing Room, the instructional series where we get members to talk about their experiences, talk about things that they enjoy, and what it's like to be an instructor and utilize that time. Today's conversation is an instructor who earns their first type rating, especially somebody who's done it recently. My guests today are Brandon Brown, who works for a regional airline and earned his Embraer 175 type in November of 2019. He's from Kalamazoo, Michigan, and has 2 years of flight instruction experience. Brandon, welcome.
How you doing, John?
My next guest is Nick Schmall. He has also 2 years of instruction. He's from Memphis, Tennessee, and earned his Citation XL, XLS in March of 2020. Nick, welcome.
Hey, how are you, John?
And finally, Evan Youngblood. He has a type rating in an Embraer 170 and 190 and also works for a regional airline. And he earned his type rating in October of 2019 with 2 years of flight instruction. Evan, welcome.
Hey, John.
So I'm so glad that you guys took the time to do this with me today. I think it's a really interesting topic, and I think our members, especially those that have goals of achieving a type rating themselves, will find this quite interesting. We'll jump straight into it, and I'll let you guys kind of carry the conversation here. But my first question is sort of what skills did you develop as instructors that helped you through the training of your first type rating? Brandon, what are your thoughts?
Well, first things first, when the DPE hands you that shiny new, temp cert, flight instructor temp cert, what does he always tell you? He's like, hey, this is a ticket to learn. And that couldn't be, that is so true. The skills you learn as a flight instructor, especially in the training and then teaching your students, directly translate to training for a type rating. I would say the biggest skill is just knowing how to learn and learning how to learn. I think that is the biggest benefit of being a flight instructor.
Nick, what do you think?
Yeah, I'd agree with Brandon. Learning is a big part of getting your CFI. I've trained a few CFIs now, and I always tell them the flying part's easy. That's nothing, right? It's the 8-hour oral on the ground. So to prepare for that is is pretty tough, and I think going through that helps a person, as Brandon said, develop the skills they need to learn, especially in a very when you get a type rating, usually it's in a very short time frame, right? Like my type was, I think we were there for 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks. So going from not knowing anything about an airplane to knowing everything about an airplane and running through emergencies and all the stuff you got to do when you get a type rating, it is difficult. So I think learning is definitely a key there. I think another key too is learning how to, or developing your multitasking skills, right? So everything's faster in a jet. That's what I was told on the first day. So everything you learn as a flight instructor in a 172 shooting approaches, multiply that by about 10, and that's how it's going to happen. And they didn't lie. Everything's much faster. And I went through my type with some folks that weren't instructors. They had gone off and done commercial stuff, and nothing against them, but they seemed to struggle a little bit with how fast everything was happening. When you're an instructor, you're worried about teaching, you're worried about flying the airplane, you're worried about making sure your student doesn't kill you. So you got to stay on top of all these different things. I think that really helped when it came to the type training.
Evan, how about you?
Well, I think I'll mirror kind of what those guys said, because when you learn to be an instructor, one of the things that you have to do is make lesson plans. And so you have to learn not only how to learn for yourself to be able to go through that CFI check ride, but you also have to be able to pass that knowledge on. And one thing that I found was that when I made those lesson plans, when I really became a subject matter expert on a specific item, I learned that item better. I knew more about what was going on there than I did when I was a private pilot or when I was a commercial pilot. And I did that even for myself with regards to the type rating. I spent time building little lesson plans just for myself, not for anybody else, not that anybody else was going to see these, but it helped me tremendously in reviewing the information in my own way and knowing how to do that, so that I committed that information to memory and I knew what I needed to know to move on to the next phase of our training program.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that you guys said. To kind of blend all three perspectives together, you know, being able to understand how somebody learns and how you learn gives you sort of more tools in your toolbox to learn how to study. You know, when you figure out with difficult students or not difficult students, but students who struggle with certain topics, and you have to look at that same topic from a different angle and go, okay, how am I going to help this person understand it? When you are sitting there looking at a, you know, engine diagram going, how am I going to understand this? And you can kind of use that same sort of sideways angle to help you remember. That was one of the things that was really helpful to me. You know, and to add on to it, in what helped me the most was, I think, my time as an instrument instructor. You know, because once you really learn to teach those instrument skills, that's what you're going to use, especially in the training itself, in the simulator box. Most of your stuff is going to be instrument. So when you can shoot an approach with a student without, you know, using a whole lot of your brain power, it definitely makes a difference when you get into the sim and you're trying to learn an airplane while still shooting that same instrument approach, because the approach itself isn't any different. It's just the airplane that's different.
I liked what Nick said as well. With all the instructors that I dealt with at training, they always told us that, you know, flight instructors generally have a little easier time and they perform better. And like Nick said, that's not to, you know, downplay any other pilots coming into the any pipelines or anything like that for training. But as an instructor, we know what needs to be done in order to succeed and to pass, as well as perform at a high level. And I feel like once, you know, I know for me, I struggled mightily first half of new hire training. And then when I finally got to the simulator, you know, I just kept studying, I kept working. And then when I got to the simulator, it clicked and everything clicked and I was good. But had it not been for my skills as an instructor in terms of, you know, teaching my students how to teach or, you know, teaching my students how to fly and whatnot, gosh, I would have probably struggled a lot more than I did. So
yeah, definitely. You know, as Brandon said earlier, because my DP, when I took my CFI, said the same thing, you know, congratulations, but this is just the beginning, right? You're going to do nothing but learn from here on out. And it would drive me crazy, even as I worked my way up and, you know, ended up being kind of the quasi assistant chief, helping the chief instructor and kind of mentoring all these younger CFIs. And some of them were gung ho about it. And they were like, yeah, this is great. And some of them weren't. Some of them were like, yeah, I got my certificate. I don't need to study. And I would tell them, and other people that had left CFIs that, you know, got type ratings come back, they're like, man, you better get out of that, because I'm telling you right now, when you go to get your type rating, that ain't going to cut it. You've got to study. You've got to, you know, open a book every now and then. It happens very fast. You know, and you know, for the most part, they'll leave you. You know, if you're struggling with something, yeah, they'll help you a little bit. But other than that, there's 20 other people in that class that they got to get through. So it is a very fast-paced, it's well organized and it's well done, but it is very fast-paced. And if you struggle a little bit, you're gonna have to take it upon yourself to step up to the plate a little bit and do a little extra studying and, you know, get into the groups. We did group learning and stuff like that at nights at the hotels. So those are the things that really you develop that'll start helping you when you get your CFI and you really don't know it, you know, you don't really know what it's about. So, you know, I think that's important to develop those skills. When you get to the advanced stuff, it makes it a little more tolerable, a little easier, if you will.
Kind of, play off that point. I think we've all seen students. I think we've all had students where, at the private level, you're doing what you need to do as an instructor to get those students through. And from the student's perspective, that partnership with the instructor has been there all the way up until the CFI. And that's really when you as the student, as the CFI candidate, have to take it upon yourself to go and do what you need to do to get through that plan. And as has been said, the type rating is much the same. The training is there. It's very well done, but it's very quick. And if you can't go and learn on your own and train yourself out of a book and train yourself out of material that's given to you, that's going to be a struggle. And as a CFI, you're constantly having to do that because you have to be able to answer the questions. The student's going to come to you with questions and they're going to ask you something. And it's going to be some question that you never thought they would ever ask you. And so you're going to have to go and figure that question out and be able to come up with an answer for them. And you might be lucky enough to be able to run down the hallway and find another instructor who can help you out, or you might not. You might have to be on your own to do that. And there's some of that certainly at least in my training environment when I got my type.
Yeah, and to sort of piggyback on that thought, one of the things I was considering was the idea that when I went through my initial training, I think everybody, but certainly me, runs into this point sort of in the middle where you're like, oh man, am I going to get through this? And just about every instructor at flight safety or at an airline will say, trust me. You got to trust me. You got to trust the process. We'll get you through. If we think that you have some issues, we'll discuss that later on down the road, but just, have some faith in yourself in the process. And I think having been an instructor and having had to tell that to my students, like, hey, I wouldn't send you on a check ride if I thought you were going to fail. A good instructor doesn't do that. And so it allowed me to actually have even more faith in my instructors because I knew that I had spoken those words and I had spoken them earnestly. For somebody who maybe isn't an instructor, maybe it's a little more difficult to have that kind of faith because you've not had to put yourself in those shoes before.
Yeah, that's very true. And also, from a student perspective, when you are the student and you're learning for the purpose of that type rating, and you hear that instructor say that, you can be honest with yourself in that if the instructor's telling you that things are good, we typically are our own worst critic when it comes to learning new things in flying. I'm certainly guilty of that. That can give you that confidence to go forward, but it also can tell you that you're on the right track. Knowing that from an instructor standpoint, because they don't want to see you fail with a type certificate any more than any of us want to see a private pilot applicant fail when we send them out for a check ride. That's certainly not our goal.
Absolutely. So guys, kind of changing that perspective. What did you learn from some of your previous instructors that maybe helped you shift your mindset back into being a student again? Because sometimes, as an instructor, we get so used to seeing it from that perspective, but now you're in the other seat again. Was that a difficult transition? And what did you use to put yourself back in that spot? Let's start with Evan this time.
So one of the things that I think it's very easy to fall into as a CFI, especially if you've been instructing for a long time, is the idea that you are the subject matter expert on what's going on, whether it's in the flight school that you're working at or the aircraft that you're teaching in, whatever that may be. And when you go for a type rating, especially if it's the first type rating, as we've said, there's going to be a lot of new stuff. There's going to be things you've never seen before. There might be ways of doing things that you haven't had to deal with before, depending on the environment that you're in. And when I work with another instructor for any purpose, whether it was to do my double I or my MEI, or just to give a fellow instructor an IPC or something like that, I'm always reminded of the fact that we're out here to learn. And because that instructor who may have more hours instructing than I have may learn something from me. And that being able to do that, being able to sit down with somebody who maybe is a brand new CFI, that doesn't mean that they can't teach you something. And that, for me at least, helped me with that training environment to go in there and go, look, this is an environment that I have to be open to receiving information. I have to be open to learning new things. And I'm going to take that personally as this is an opportunity for me to learn to help someone else on down the road and keep the spirit of instructing alive, even though I'm not an instructor for purposes of that job, for purposes of that aircraft. That doesn't mean that I can't be helpful, but I have to be willing to learn first.
Absolutely. Nick, how about you?
Yeah, so I have to say I've been incredibly blessed in my aviation career. The chief at the flight school that I worked at and got all my ratings at and that kind of stuff. He's the chief instructor. He's our DPE. He got his pilot's license in the mid 50s. Right? He's a Wright Brothers Master Pilot recipient. I mean, he's been flying for 65 years. So he's incredibly intelligent. So I tell him all the time, he's probably, forgot more about aviation than I'll ever learn. Like, he's just that kind of guy. And as Evan was saying, he even though he's, at the top and he's incredibly intelligent, he got me into flying warbirds and formation flying, and he's known real big in that, setting, in that little small niche of the industry. He still takes the time to teach whenever he can. So, just even something as small as sitting around the lunch table, we're still talking about something, right? Or he feels like he wants to go fly the T6. His rule is there should never be an empty back seat. So he throws somebody in the back seat and goes and we'll go do cross-controlled stalls and things like that. So I learned from him. And what was great about that is when I got ready to leave to go to my type rating, I was extremely nervous. I was like, I'm comfortable here. I make pretty decent money. He's like, this is what you want to do. Not forever, right? He was like, you need to go on and do this. You come back, do this part-time, come back and instruct, do formation, that kind of stuff. And I was like, yeah, it's just going to be different. He was like, you'll be fine. You just got to remember that you're not at the top anymore. Now you're at the bottom of the rung, and you got to recognize that, right? So, like Evan said, you got to be willing to learn. You're not the head honcho anymore. You're coming in and you don't know nothing about nothing, especially on this aircraft. They send you some stuff to read over that you need to learn, the flows and the memory items before you get there. But other than that, you're nothing at all. So, and that's the way they want it. They want you to come in so that they can teach you the way that they know works. And you start out doing their program. You don't have to break a bunch of bad habits, things like that. So, learning from him and taking his advice, not the top guy anymore, coming in as the wee little guy. You need to kind of have an open mind to that, because that can be kind of a shock sometimes for some people, I guess.
Yeah, be a little humble. That was one of the things they told us going into airline training was, just remember that. Especially when you're an IOE, the people that are willing to go, man, that really stunk. The IOE captains tend to be a little more forgiving. Brandon, what are your thoughts?
That was, to me, the hardest part going into the training was, you've been an instructor, you've been the person for so long, and to go back and start again at the very bottom, that was tough. I always joked around and said, well, I got to remember what it's like to be a student again. And that's not easy when you've been the instructor for quite a while. But to piggyback off of what you were saying, the humility and the humbleness is, I've been blessed throughout my entire time as a pilot, getting awesome instructors such as yourself. I've been blessed, and from my instructors, I've seen that humbleness and that humility to be like, you know what, you're right. I don't know this. Let's look it up together. And that directly translated to my training for, my type rating. Hey, when something wasn't going right, or I was, maybe not doing something properly, I always, or maybe if there was a better way to do it that my instructor was teaching me, I was all ears and I was ready to do whatever it took to make sure that, hey, I'm taking in what this instructor's saying. So really it's that humbleness. It's that, that thought of, hey, this is what it's like being a student again, and kind of working your way up to that point. So that to me is what I took from other instructors, into my training.
Well, and the cool thing is that I think that having that experience, because you're all going to be captains one day, and maybe this isn't the best way to phrase it, but captains are there to help first officers. You're not necessarily there as a quote unquote flight instructor, but typically speaking, a first officer is somebody who's newer to the airplane. And so while they're not your students, you're there to kind of help them go, hey, maybe this is an easier way to do it. Or, hey, here's how to, be a little bit softer on the brakes. Here's how to have a nicer landing. And so, from my perspective, somebody who goes into a first officer position from somewhere, they're easily better equipped to be future captains down the road. And that's something that makes you even more valuable to the company, because you're going to be that captain who's going to help that first officer. You're going to be that captain who might potentially transition into a training captain to make that first officer better, or even sort of help them acclimate to the system or the airplane at a faster pace than they might otherwise with some of your more traditional captains who might just sit there and watch a first officer struggle a little bit. I think we've all had one of those now and again. So, I think that the positives of having that instructional experience just from start to finish is huge. So let's just assume that you all are at one point or another going to begin instruction again. What would you take from this experience that might make your ability to teach a primary student again a little bit higher? Is there anything you took from having this kind of condensed training that would make things, a more improved system for you as an instructor? Nick, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah. So patience is a big one, right? So we're all instructors here. We've all instructed primary and instrument, and I know I'm not going to say easier and not more fun, but sometimes it seems that people much rather have taught the multi-commercial rather than the primary, because primary is harder, right? These people have no idea how to fly an airplane. They're usually somewhat scared, nervous, that kind of stuff. And so it takes time. Whereas a commercial student, they already know how to fly the airplane. I'm just going to teach them lazy eights and chandelles, and, send them on their way. So patience is a big one, because, I was a CFI and II and NAI and all that. But when I got into the sim and that jet, I didn't know crap about that jet. I didn't know anything about it.
Right.
I had never flown it before. They give you these big posters to put on the wall and, learn where all the switches and all the buttons and stuff are. But the first time you step foot into that sim, you're like, whoa, it's kind of shock a little bit. Right. So, I still instruct on the side quite a bit. So you got to take that back with you. If you have a primary student who's struggling a little bit, and you're like, man, you're 20, 30 hours, you still haven't soloed, just got to be patient with them and stick with them and get it done. Because once they do it, 'cause they've always done it. I've never had a student that never soloed or never, not necessarily finished, but never soloed, right? So some got it done in 10 hours, some got it done in 40. It just is what it is. And it's the 40-hour ones that wear on the instructor, right? Because you're like, oh man, I got to fly with this guy again today. We did like 20 landings yesterday. And it's just, I get it. I've been there, but getting knocked back into that seat where, man, that first landing in the sim was terrible. This is the F-18 landing, right? Just came straight in on the deck of the carrier. But taking that is, John kind of put earlier, the humility and the patience and okay, been there before. I got out of it. I was at the top, and then I got knocked right back down to the bottom again. And so that's what this guy's going through, or this girl's going through, and we'll get them through it. It's just going to take a little more time, and that's fine. It just takes patience.
Brandon, what did you take from the type rating training that would make you better when you decide to return to flight instruction?
Nick stole it from me. Totally patience. I completely 100% agree. And to piggyback what he was saying, I remember, teaching primary students as a CFI that's a test. That's a test of, in my opinion, how good of an instructor you are. And you get an instrument student or a commercial student or, a CFI candidate or something like that. And you don't have to instruct as hard or work as hard as I've heard before, but I would honestly, patience to me is, because these students struggle. And I, just think about when I'm in that, in that jet, learning how to fly, and, trying to think of my flows and all that stuff. And it's just, it's tough. So I would honestly say that bar none would be the number one thing that I take forward, in my career.
Evan, how about you?
I'm going to go just a slightly different direction with that. I fully agree that the patience is definitely something that I think all of us can use a refresher in just to make sure that we're there. But the thing that really stuck with me in the training, where my training occurred, was the separation of the systems knowledge, the procedures knowledge, the flow, and then the actual flying of the aircraft. And, we've all been in that situation where we've introduced a student to a new airplane, whether that's day one or whether it's, hey, we're going to go fly an Aero now to do commercial or whatever the case may be. And it's easy as an instructor to forget what day one in a new airplane feels like. And so to be able to convey that knowledge separately, to put a flow together for the airplane, to put a standard procedure, if you want to call it that, for a particular maneuver or an approach or whatever it is that you're going to do, to be able to teach that on a poster and get the student comfortable with that. If you have an FTD or something like that available to you, to be able to use that before you go and actually do everything in the aircraft, to separate those different elements, and impress upon them how important each of those elements is in and of itself, to put the whole big picture together. I don't think I fully appreciated that in the type rating training until it was over, until we were actually done with it, and I was out on the line and flying and took a look back at it. And speaking for me personally, that's not how my flight instruction went. And not that it was bad or anything like that, but it just wasn't the way that it was presented to me. And I think that there's an opportunity there for us as instructors to, of course, learn from our own experience, but also to improve the training idea or the concept that we're conveying to our students, having come from this professional training environment.
Yeah, it sort of proves that that point of, how do you eat an elephant? Well, one piece at a time. You really break it down into its small pieces first. That's a great point. I hadn't thought about that, but you're absolutely right. They do a really good job of segmenting all of that up and then sort of building it up at the end before you even realize what had happened.
Yeah.
So, guys, I have one final question for you. For our fellow instructors out there who are getting ready for their first type rating or on the cusp of applying for that first job that's going to get them that first type rating, what would be your singular piece of advice? Now, I'm going to go first on this one. The thing that they always told us when we went into initial training was learn together, pass together, learn alone, fail alone. And I have always been kind of a loner. When I study, I'm find myself a quiet corner of the room, nobody around, earbuds in, and, study till I can't see straight anymore. And thankfully they impressed it on us hard enough that I was able to sort of forcefully pull myself away from that type of training. And immediately started working with a study group in my training class. And it was one of the best decisions I ever made. I was not prepared for how well that was going to work. And that is my number one thing for, going back and doing that kind of training again, is making sure that I'm studying at least with one or two other people, because it really is effective. Let's see, who do I want to pick on first? Brandon, I think you can go first this time.
My biggest piece of advice would be to study often. Trust your study habits and trust your, the skills that you've built over the years. But also, too, don't be afraid to step away for a minute and go, bowling or do something to get your mind off of it, because training for a type rating it's like sticking a fire hose in your mouth. I mean, and turning it on full blast. And no matter what, no matter how effective your study habits may be, you're going to struggle, and you just have to keep working at it and step away when you get frustrated. Do something that doesn't involve flying whatsoever, and take a couple hours, or go out and see a movie with your the people who are doing the training with you, and just keep it up. Because what you're going to find is, as you're struggling, you're going to find that it's going to start coming together. Everything's going to start coming together, and you're going to step in the simulator after you've struggled with systems and struggled with your flows and procedures, and you're finally going to get in that simulator and it's going to click. And that's the best feeling. But I feel like you can't burn yourself out. You're, kind of like what you were saying, rely on your classmates, have them help you out. But also, step away with them and go to the movies with them. And it's a team effort. But I would say the biggest thing is just trust your study habits and keep working at it, even when you feel like you're not gaining any traction. And don't be afraid to step away.
Evan, how about you?
So the instructor in me, when I went for my type, wanted to get as much information as quickly as I can, right? So you've got that interview coming, or you've got that initial date, your class date, and it's a month or it's 2 months off, and you're thinking, I'm gonna go fly a beach jet or whatever it is, right? So what I'll do is I'll scour the internet and I'll find a manual and I'll read up everything I can, right? Don't do that. Go get the training material that they want you to have. How much do you like as an instructor having to unlearn something from a student who came in with a bad habit, right? The training department is prepared. They will give you what you need. Follow their recommendations. Go through the training program the way they have set it up for you, and don't be afraid to ask questions. If something doesn't click, or worse yet, if it seems like everybody in the class knows something that you don't know, ask a question, because maybe you've got a document that you didn't get, or something like that you should have. But use that training footprint the way they have it designed. And as was said, don't burn yourself out, but at the same time, don't shove it under the rug. We had a 2-week period for self-study. And the training department said, go home and follow this list of things to do for 1 week, and then repeat it on the second week. And we all kind of looked at each other and went, well, why would we repeat it on the second week? We'll just go through it. It sounds like a week off to me. No, there's a reason that they have that set up that way. We tell students to go home and look at something before tomorrow's lesson or next week's lesson. And can you tell when they didn't look over it before next week's lesson or tomorrow's lesson? Yes, of course you can. And so follow that training footprint as they lay it out, because it's there to help you. Those instructors are there to help you. Your classmates are there to help you. I made some great friends in NDOT class. We still talk. We still compare notes. We still ask questions to each other about what's going on, or a change in the manual or something like that. And that's very, very, very valuable networking when you're together learning that. And everybody's going to be in the same boat that you are, even though you came from different backgrounds. And there's going to be excellent questions. And you, of course, can learn from everybody else's questions, but don't be afraid to ask your own as well.
Good advice. Nick, bring us home.
Yeah, so I agree with both those things very much so. I remember my type rating, we were a solid like 11 or 12 days straight with no days off. And it was just bam, 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 just throwing stuff. And you're like, I don't know what to do. I'm so confused. And then we got 2 days off. And so my sim partner was like, you know what? Let's go to the beach. I did my type rating in Orlando. So we drove 45 minutes to Cocoa Beach and spent the day on the beach. Right. And then our second day off, we went and did a little study and we got back into it. So I think that's a big thing. Take some time to decompress a little bit. I think another thing too is take all of your study habits that you've had, that you've developed, your teaching habits that you've developed, and take those with you. Do some review on the basics before you go. Like John said earlier, the type rating is a lot of instrument flying. It's single engine approaches and circling approaches and approaches to minimums, and right. Well, we don't do those every day as an instructor. So go back and just review a little bit, because you're learning so much new stuff. You don't want to have to go back and review the old stuff that you should already know. Right. And that will really help. To my last point, that will really help when it comes to your sim partner. Right. So the biggest thing that I took away from the type rating is you want to be a good sim partner, right? Most of the time you're going to be most of these type ratings are multi-pilot, aircraft. So be a good sim partner. You don't want to be that guy that is struggling or is bringing your sim partner down, right? So there was an astronaut, his name was Colonel Chris Hadfield. He was the commander of the ISS. I just recently read a book of his, and he described it. He said there's three types of people in the world. There's a -1, there's a 0, and there's a +1, right? +1's a guy that overachieves and gets everything done. A 0 is a guy that doesn't really hurt anything, doesn't really, go up above and beyond. He's just the status quo. And then there's a -1, and that's a guy that messes everything up. And then you got to go back in and, your partners or whoever got to go back in and correct everything and makes everything harder for the team, right? So you got to remember, as you're going into this, you're coming from a single pilot environment as an instructor to a CRM environment. Even though you had students in the cockpit and stuff like that, it was still single pilot, right? So you're going into a CRM environment. At that point, it is, you don't want to let your partner down, right? So don't be the -1, right? If anything, be the 0. If you can, be the +1, but if anything, be the 0. Learn enough, study hard, and work with your partner to make sure that you both get through it, because it is when you take your check ride in a type rating with a multi-pilot aircraft, you're both getting checked. You're getting checked on the left seat and the right seat, right? Especially if you're getting a PIC type rating. So there's not really one that is a break over the other one. Now, a lot of people say the guy in the right seat works the hardest, and I would have to wholeheartedly agree with that, because he's usually the one running the checklist and pushing the buttons and talking to ATC and calming the passengers down and whatever. But you want to be a good sim partner, and to do that, you've got to take what you learned as an instructor and your study habits and learning stuff and your knowledge that you've learned, especially your instrument knowledge that you've learned as your time as an instructor, and carry that with you to your type rating, to the sims. Because if you don't do that, you're going to struggle. You're going to have a hard time, and it's not going to be fun, which honestly, as hard as it was, and everything, it was still kind of fun, right? We're learning a new airplane. We're getting to learn all this cool stuff. It doesn't have a prop in front of it. It's got these 2 jet engines back here. I don't know how those work, right? So it's a cool thing, right? And you don't want it to be any harder than it has to be. So the more you can prepare and the more you can take from your time as a CFI into your type rating training will help not only you, it'll help your partner, which then will help you, right? It's like it's full circle, and you'll get through it. And yeah, that's pretty much the advice I got.
Well, that's all great advice, and gentlemen, even for those that may have gotten your type rating back in 2019, congratulations. It's always a huge accomplishment, and I appreciate so much that you took the time to join us today. I think our membership and our aspiring instructors, can really take some of this stuff to heart. So I think it's really, really good stuff. Thank you so much.